Hold on a minute, who's hosting that show now? The latest from our daily newsletter at podnews.net.
Let's go.
Sex, Lies and DM Slides every Tuesday exclusively on Spotify.
Well, launched in September 2020 by Spotify, that show sounds a little bit different today. Sex, Lies and DM Slides appears to have relaunched with new hosts without the knowledge of the podcasters who say they created the show. Gizzy Erskine has posted on Instagram that the show, made by Spotify UK, is, quotes, being made again without us. If Spotify don't want to make it with us, then that's fine, but don't steal our format and name. We created it in my kitchen over a series of months, she says. Spotify just paid for it to be made. I'm up to my eyeballs at being exploited by the big corporations and money people. The original shows have been removed, and Spotify didn't respond to an invitation to comment. Spotify is cancelling 11 of its original shows, says The Hollywood Reporter. Those cancelled represent less than 2% of Spotify's more than 500 original podcasts. It is likely to result, though, in less than 5% of Spotify's staff on original podcasts being laid off. If you're hiring, Connor Sampson has volunteered to connect you. And Kim Kardashian's new podcast for Spotify is being criticised by 2 survivors of the multiple murder case she's investigating. In other news, DDEX, the international standard-setting organisation focused on the exchange of data and information across the music industry, has published a white paper about how to use music in podcasts. A spokesperson says not having proper standards around music usage is a barrier for licensing and ultimately the proper compensation. A hospital has been flooded with tens of thousands of angry phone calls after a Spreaker podcaster told his listeners to call the healthcare facility and doxed some individual workers. The calls blocked other communication about patient care. It's one of a number of podcasts that the Tech Transparency Project allege, incorrectly, that Apple is hosting. The podcast is also listed but blocked from recommendation on Google Podcasts. Apple Podcasts have made it easier to launch an Apple Podcast paid subscription for your show, removing the requirement to create a channel first. Hot on the heels of an agreement with Stitcher and SiriusXM, SEA's Listener has announced that it will also exclusively represent Wondery's podcasts in Australia, and an Aardvark is launching a podcast. If the press pictures are anything to go by, though, it'll sound rubbish, because Arthur is way too far away from that microphone. In People News, amid the news of cancelled shows, 2 new hires at Spotify's Parcast and Gimlet. Nicole Beemsterboer is to become Managing Director of Gimlet. She joined Gimlet in March and was previously at NPR. And Liliana Kim will lead Parcast. She moves from APM. And in podcast news from the New York Times, Hard Fork releases its first episode today. It features veteran tech journalists Kevin Roos and Casey Newton and looks at the latest stories in the world of tech and business. Locatora Radio has joined iHeart's La Cultura podcast network with 6 seasons of self-produced episodes. They're the first indie to join the Latinx-centered podcast network. The Made by Google podcast appears hot on the heels of announcements of the new Pixel 7 Android phone and the Pixel Watch. The show is hosted by Podigy. Looking Forward has Podnews' editor, James Cridland, that's me, as a guest this week. I look at opportunities to work in podcasting, whether you're looking to be in front of the microphone or participating in the myriad other opportunities I suggest are out there. And the Media podcast this week also has me as a guest, talking about Spotify's cancellation of podcasts and the BBC's reduction of audio drama on air. Also guesting is Maggie Brown. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.